Welcome everybody to this episode that is extremely boring. It's about photography, the 101 basics, ISO, shutter, aperture. I'm hoping that the way I explain it here will hopefully get you to understand the basics of how the camera and the lenses work together side by side. So in this episode we're going to go over the sensor sizes, ISO, shutter speed, and the lens. We're going to go a little more in depth on the actual lens, and then come to the end of the episode we're going to go over how to determine, if you haven't bought a camera, to which camera you should go for, and how to kind of establish how to make the one that fits for you best. There's 4 examples of different cameras that I have at the end, and how I came to the conclusion of which one would suit me best. Now I have varied off on my camera sensors, but I'll use these as a reference. So here we have the first one here. It's basically the sensor. Every camera will have a sensor, and it depends on the size, whether it's a full frame or an APS-C. Basically a full frame is full size. As you see here, it's 35mm. Well, you obviously can't see it, but take my word for it, this is a full frame sensor. A APS-C sensor will actually just be a little bit smaller, and it would still capture the 24 megapixels. So this here is a 24 megapixel full frame sensor. Now if we had an APS-C, which would be probably about this size, maybe a little bit more or a little bit less, I'm not exact science, it would still capture 24 megapixels. But if you think about it, if you had it on this connection here and your lens was to fill the frame here, that you would be actually cropped in technically. So that's why a lot of people say it's a crop sensor, but it's an APS-C, which is APS-C, C is for crop. So it's technically already a crop in, but you have still the same amount of resolution as you would with a full frame. So there's that bit of a gap there. So please note this as well, if you have an APS-C lens and you put it on a full frame camera, that this part of the image is not accounted for in some lenses. So you may get a picture here, but when you open it up you have these kind of black, kind of circular images around here, like it's kind of like it's looking through a cone or something. So just be aware of that. Sorry, I forgot to go over the ISO. So an ISO is basically electronically charged sensor and how much light it can take in. So just think of it like first thing in the morning when you wake up, your eyes are very sensitive to light. Like if someone opens the curtains very quickly, your eyes will, absorb more light and it'll look very bright. But if you were wide awake and you just kind of walked from inside to outside, your eyes would adjust quicker. So it's kind of the sensitivity towards the light. Now the issue is, the higher the ISO, the more sensitive it is, it kind of gives this grainy feel to the images. Now depending on the camera and the sensor setup, some of them are designed to go very high so you won't notice much grain on it, but other ones with higher megapixels will be impacted more with the ISO, because the more megapixels you have here means you're going to have more little dots on each one of these to pick up the actual image. But if you're making it more sensitive, it means that the amount of light hitting the actual sensor is just going to be diffracted a little bit, so it kind of creates this grainy effect. So I hope that kind of explains it a bit more. If you need more details, let me know below in the comments, and I'll try to give you a bit more information on this. So the shutter speed is the second function that the actual camera itself controls. So a lot of people say use a slow shutter speed or a fast shutter speed, and what that really means is you have your sensor set at the back with the ISO and ready to absorb that picture. But you need to block out the light until it is ready, until that image is set and ready to go, and you press that button. When you press that button, depending on how long you set your shutter speed for, will allow the amount of light in. So these bars here move up and down very, very quick or very, very slow depending on the shutter speed. So here we have 1/8000th of a second. So it will go from the very top here and it will start going down, as you can see here, and it will allow that little bit of light in very quick. Useful purposes of this would be extremely bright days where you want to use a shallow depth of field, so you keep it like not overexposed, or if you're doing action, sports, wildlife, you want to keep the numbers very high to kind of freeze that action. And then as you go down lower, it will let more light in for a little bit longer. So 1/1000th of a second will let more light in, but it would still capture motion, so you'd still get away with like motion, sports, and bright days as well, like depending on how bright it is. And then as you decrease the time, so 1/4 of a second is very long in the terms of cameras. So 1/4 of a second, if you think about it, how much shaking would you do in 1/4 of a second? How much motion would a car do in 1/4 of a second? So determining how long or how short a shutter speed is, you kind of have to judge for yourself. There are some rules out there, but they can be broken for the pursuit of art. So for example, if you want to do a running waterfall, you could do a couple of seconds. So this is past the 1 second, 1/4 of a second. You can start at that, I think 1/10 of a second. You'll get a little bit of motion blur in the water, which is fine. It makes it look silky smooth. But then if you go to 5 seconds or 10 seconds, you're letting more light in, and as things are moving in that image, that will be captured. So that's where you get the car light trails, or the water moving in the waterfall, or rivers moving, or even clouds, depending on the filters. There's a lot of things that you need to do to get the exact settings right, depending on the conditions. If it's nighttime, you wouldn't need a filter. If it's in the middle of the day, you'll need to put some sunglasses basically on your camera. So that there is the two functions that the camera would have. Everything else is kind of a bonus. Whether it changes the white balance to a certain degree, you can always do that in post-production on Photoshop. Whether you have a shutter release cable, or if you have an inbuilt timer, you can get additions to this, whether it's Wi-Fi compatible, or you just have to unplug the SD card and plug it into your laptop, or if there's 2 ports for the SD cards for backup or renewal. So there's all these factors in the camera that are just kind of additions that you mainly don't really need. The 3 main things is the sensor, the shutter speed, the ISO, and the aperture. So the difference between mirrorless and DSLR. Basically, technically the only difference is just here on how the light gets up. So with the older cameras, the light would travel through the lens and it would hit the mirror, and it would come up and hit another mirror and then out. So you could actually have your eyes here, so you can see exactly what your lens is seeing. Now you have your sensor back here and you have your shutter right here. So this is ready, waiting to go on the signal of the amount of time that you have set. And then when you press the trigger button, this mirror here will flip down or flip up depending on the design, and allow the light to travel through, hit on the sensor, and then depending on the sensor, depending on the shutter speed you have had set up, will remove this and allow the light to then hit the sensor, be processed, and then you have your image. So when we move to a mirrorless, it's basically just this remove, because we have the technology now that the sensor can look out, see the image, and then just display it on a tiny little TV inside. So you're basically removing this here from a camera, which is just all moving parts, and then you get it down into the mirrorless camera. So you have the light hitting the sensor at the shutter with the sensor ready behind, but it knows that it can actually use this image here and then show it up on your little display. It saves a bit of weight and a bit of movement. There's been issues where with this movement up on longer exposures that it can cause a little bit of vibration. So you reduce that and you reduce the weight. However, we come to price. Comes now down to the price. Are you willing to settle for a budget camera with the mirror, or if you're willing to spend a bit more to get the mirrorless? It's a little bit lighter and it has a great function where you can actually live view. When you're looking through the mirror, you're just seeing light as is, but your settings can make a difference on that. So you might be seeing a bright scene here, but by the time you take your picture, it's very dark, depending on your shutter speed and your aperture. However, with the mirrorless cameras, it will actually determine the exact, to a degree, image that you're going to get. So you can change the settings on your camera and then you'll actually visually be able to see them. I currently have a mirrorless camera for this fact and for a few other differences as well. But there's still nothing wrong with a DSLR. Now, the lens. So this is where light comes in and goes to your sensor. One thing that's always had me confused for a long time, when people talk about the aperture, they're talking about the ring closing and opening up to make it more blurry and more sharper. But I never got that. I always thought, like, if I'm closing something down, I'm not letting the light in. But this is how the internals of a lens work. The light will come in and bounce down here and bounce down here, come down to here, to bounce back up and in. So when you actually open or close your aperture here, it's not exactly here, but I'm using here as a space. The light, these lenses here will move just a little bit back and forth to kind of make sure that when you do, when you do change your shutter, when you change your aperture, that the light will still go through the actual little part of it and then come through the other side and then be ready to hit your sensor. There's also differences between if you have a very expensive f1.4, you'll have better glass in here. Some of them will be a lot larger so that they capture the good parts of the quality of the image, and then by the time it actually gets to the sensor, you technically have an image that's over here, but the glass here has it so that this will be the exact same millimeter range. So this is what the internals of a lens would look like. Varying lenses, you have your primary lens, which is basically it will be static at that millimeter. Then you have zoom lenses, which will allow you to zoom in and out, get that little bit of distance or different angle from where you're standing at. Then you have macro lenses, which just allow you to focus a lot closer is all. And then you have like a tilt shift, and then you have I think that's it really. But different lenses have different functionalities. You might have a 24 to 70 millimeter, so that means it will do a focal length, so I'll get more into that in a bit, but it means the zoom range that you have and what distance you get to see the actual image at. But one might be an f4 and one might be an f2.8, and the reason why one is a lot more expensive, to open up to 2.8, which would be a lot wider, means that you have to build in that into the lens, which means there's a lot finer detail put into the lens, and by doing that it costs a lot more. Plain and simple, it just costs more to build it up. You're letting more light in, which when you learn, light is everything about photography. So here are the aperture rings. This is what confused me. How is allowing the amount of light through this one here and this one here still producing the same image? So that's where the light coming in and going through those lenses will make it fit, so that it will still fit through this one if it's set at this size and then set at this size. What these do here is they do two functions. One is this is the amount of light that is being let in. So this one is letting a lot of light in right here. It's going to be nice and bright photo. We're down here, you're letting a little bit of light in. Now there is a sweet spot between extremely sharp images, which would be f8 to f16. Anything after this you get a diffraction, and then from f8 all the way down to 1 or 1.2 you get that lovely creamy bokeh in the background, but you can also have a little bit softer of an image. So you might get the nose or the eye in focus, but then around the face it's a bit softer. And then also it can do for the edges as well. But a lot of people love the soft effect of images, so a lot of people will go for these numbers, and it lets a lot more light in as well. So you get that shallow depth of field, that blurry background, that creamy bokeh in the end. Or you can have crystal clear sharp images if you're taking pictures of a castle with greenery in front of it. So this is the aperture, and this is what happens inside the lens. So as the light passes through, it will bounce up and bounce down, but the lens is designed so that if it is at f2.8 it will know to move this lens or this lens or this lens just a fraction, so that the image can hit the sensor with the exact amount as any other size. So these adjust back and forth, and that will allow the light to move in. So here we have it. So one light will bend it down a little bit, and one light will bend it back up a little bit, so that if you have your aperture wide open here, it will allow the image to come in to hit your sensor here. But then it will also, if it comes down to being a smaller aperture, it will allow the image to also hit the exact same sensor, the exact same size. So I hope that explains that. That one always had me baffled for a while. Now, you're thinking to yourself, you're just joining along, what kind of sensor, what kind of camera should I have? The main thing is the budget. There's no point me telling you that you need a $5,000 camera if you only have $600 to spend. So you have to kind of think, do you have the budget you want for the camera that you want? Or shall you save a bit more? Or if you have enough, or if you're just willing to just step into the game, try it out, see if you enjoy it, and then further invest. What are you going to shoot? If you're going to shoot some weddings, I would suggest 2 cameras, very top of the range glass, so a lot of money involved there. Now you can of course shoot a wedding with cheaper camera and cheaper glass. I've done so before, but I was not the primary photographer. I was just there as a photographer friend, taking a few random shots. Then the future of the company. Nikon is hitting a bit of trouble right now, so will they still be producing support? Will they still be producing lenses in the future? How much glass is available, and how much does it cost? When Sony first came out onto the market, they only had a limited selection of glass, limited selection of lenses, and they were very expensive. Are you willing to go to the second-hand market? Would you be willing to buy second-hand from a colleague, from someone that you know, or off a stranger off the internet? It depends on you. So here is a side-by-side comparison we have of 5 different cameras. Personally now myself, I would stay away from the point and shoot. This is a fixed lens on a small sensor. Let me see here. So your effective megapixels is 16 megapixels, and you have a small sensor. Now this is fairly new. This is 2019, so it will have a lot more features than this one here from 11 years ago. This is a bridge camera. Now it has a lens on it. It is fixed though, so you can't change that lens. So this one will be the one fits all lens, but it will not allow for a lot of 2.8 or lower. Usually these are f3 to f5.6, depending on when the lens extends or contracts the amount of light that lets in, so you're very limited with one of these. So the price on this, I'd say, be about 300 to 400. Then also look at the megapixels, 10 megapixels, but it's not always about that. As we'll come over here now, this was the first camera that I owned, was the Nikon D3200. Beautiful camera. I've had it for 3 years solid. Now the price was a little bit lower than this. I got it on a special sale, so I was very happy. You can get it with a kit lens. It's a crop sensor, so it's a APS-C, and let me see here, it has 24 megapixels. Now let me go on to what my next camera was. I bought the Nikon D500, another APS-C camera. As you can see now, the price has gone up. This was released in 2016, and this one has 21 megapixels. Now you might be thinking, why is this one $2,000? This one is $900, but I'm losing out on 3 megapixels. Well, number one, this one has a few more features, but this camera here was specifically designed for low light, so that means the ISO sensitivity is very high on this. So you can go up very high in the ISO, but because I mentioned about the megapixels, if you have more megapixels for something that's going to use the ISO, you're going to get a lot of grain. So they reduced the megapixels on this to 21 megapixels, so you could get better low light performance, and boy did it do brilliantly. I have to give it credit, this was an amazing camera. I kind of regret giving it up from time to time. The Sony a7 III isn't as good, but I might go with the Sony AS3, which is supposed to be amazing at low light and is only 12 megapixels. And now we come to this beast, the Nikon D850, which is a 45 megapixel 3 to 6,000 euro camera. Now this would depend on whether you're just buying the body itself or with an attached lens or two, and with additional features built in. But let's scroll down. So we see 70% silver award. The D500, even though it's a 21 megapixel, less megapixels, almost by half, over half, it's just edged a bit more than the Nikon D850. So it also comes down to the additional things. The main thing here when buying a camera is the megapixels and your budget. Everything else is just the bells and whistles. So whether it's leather seats, heated steering wheel, they're just additional features, and most can be procured by second-hand attachments. Like this camera here would have a dual SD card slot. This one here has dual SD card slot. This one here is single SD slot. Not good for weddings. When you're doing weddings, you want to have 2 SD slots for backup, just in case. Then we also come down to the speed as well. So let me come down to hold on, megapixels, what they will shoot as well, whether RAW and TIFF, RAW and JPEG, and then we'll come down to the shutter speed. So this point and shoot will only do 1/4000th of a second. So if you need to get a lot faster than that, if it's too bright, or if you're doing a sports shot, you can't go faster than that. 1/2000th of a second here, 1/4000th of a second here, and the two top range 1/8000th of a second. You have a standard 30-second, but you can actually put on a little adapter which will allow you to go for 5 minutes, 2 minutes, 3 minutes longer. This is good for like long star trails at night time. Then we have like whether they have a hot shoe. So this is where you would attach like a trigger for your lights, or an onboard flash. So this doesn't have it, this doesn't have it, yes. And then you also have HSS built in as well. So this is the H speed, so if you shoot anything over 1/200 of a second with this camera, you'll get like a black band. Whereas this one, 1/250th, 1/250th is the top range. Then you have different drive modes. Mirror up is used for if you're cleaning the sensor or if you're doing a long exposure without that vibration. Then you have your continuous. How many shots is it going to take in a second? So this one here will take 10 frames per second, 4 frames per second, 10 frames and 7 frames. The reason why this one would be slower is 7 frames at 45 megapixels is a lot more data than 10 frames at 20 megapixels. Then you have self timers, you have metering. All these are just data points, selling points. There's nothing here that would make your photography better or worse. So here we have the storage type, single SD. You have an SD and QHD, SD and QHD, so you have two types. Whether it allows for USB, USB 3.0, whether it has Wi-Fi. So these are all optional and additional things, and then the battery that they take, and whether they the batteries that they take and how many photos you'll get per battery, and the weight. Here is a kilo camera. Here is a half a kilo camera, and then here's one that you wouldn't even notice you have in your pocket. So there's a lot of differences to take into consideration, but your main things to look at is your budget and your sensor size. Everything else is just little features, additional things, so it wouldn't be too important. But another thing is the glass, the lenses is very important. The lenses on these would work together, so a full frame lens will work on an APS-C, but an APS-C lens will work on either. So this is the focal length. When you're looking at a lens, most popular ones are, let's say, 24 to 70. You have that distance. You have your, this would be classed as a wide angle now. You see the way you have everything here wide angle. You can adjust these even better, like so if you get to this rock, if you were standing in front of it, you could have it take up most of the screen and then still have this scenery at the back. But I think for purposes on this, they wanted to show the focal length and the zoom. So here we go, zooming in. So that's a 35 is a good prime lens as well. This is used, they say between 35 and 50 is the normal average human eyes standard look. So 35 and then 50, these would be good prime lenses to get. And then you have your kind of zoom range, so 70 to 200. You can see how much we're zooming in, about 200. And look at the distance there between 14 millimeters and 200 millimeters. You're zoomed in. Now here's where it gets interesting. So between, I believe, 24, they say 24 is kind of the wide, and then you have the ultra wide. There's not much of a difference here, you know, a couple of feet in the difference. Like look at the rock here, it's just out of frame. But when we get to 200 millimeters, the stretch from here to here is significantly large. Now watch what happens when we go past. We're only slowly creeping in. We're up to 300 millimeters, 400 millimeters. It doesn't make much more of a difference on the other end of it. So you might think, oh wow, if that's 14 millimeters to 79, this must mean I might be able to see the person standing in there and what he's reading. But no, the distance there is just significant, and it's because of the distance of the angle of view. So I hope this has given you some information, and hopefully it's given you enough to like and subscribe to my channel and follow for more photography stuff. Lately I haven't been out because of the COVID situation, so I've resorted to building up this document here to just keep on something posted. I might go over some of my photos and how I went and edited them and actually shot them, and give the layout and how I work with the models or the landscape. So please let me know what you think below.